Hey, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and while the Game Boy Mega Man titles are known largely to just recycle material from the NES games, they also managed to sneak in a few new ideas that have both had major and minor effects on the wider classic series. And with how widely available the mainline stuff is by comparison, some might not even realize that they came from these smaller titles. There were a few that surprised me. I've come up with a few that I think stand out. Worth noting, I'll be referring to the handheld games as World, then its number, like in the Japanese, not because I'm a weeb, but because it's gonna get real confusing if I try to talk about a bunch of games with the same damn names. We'll start with the obvious one, the Mega Man Killer line. While the 8 primary bosses were pulled from the NES for Worlds 1 through 4, they always had a specially designed Robot Master for each game, complete with a music-themed name. Well, except for Quint, but he doesn't count. No really, I'm looking at the Robot Master Field Guide, Updated Edition, right now, and the line is listed as MKN 001 NCAR, 002 Punk, and 003 Ballad. He's not in there at all. Though, given that he's a reworked Mega Man, I guess he'd be DLN 001 as well. Though speaking of, this is also where the special numbers got their start, for RMs that aren't in the mainline games, or would just mess up the typical divisible by 8 sets, but still needed some way to be cataloged. Guys like the King numbers, the powered up add-ons, or even base, SWN or Special Wily number 001. While this might have been bound to happen eventually, Dr. Wily's Revenge still gets credit as the one to start off the trend. But back to the Killers. This trio has appeared in other places since, them getting throwback stages and fights in the Mega Man 10 DLC, appearing together in promotional material for Rockman Online before it was cancelled, Punk getting a Navi adaptation in Battle Network, and NCAR being a rival and almost secondary main character in the recent Mr. Mega Man manga. If you remember one thing from these games, this trio would likely be it. This, though, was the one that blew my mind, that World 4 was actually the first game to add in the store. Rather than bolts, you collected P-chips, but otherwise, trade in currency to either up your abilities or just print some single-use power-ups. This has been a staple ever since, and really does a lot to make the games more accessible. In fact, you could even say that they add a secondary difficulty option. If you're struggling throwing yourself at the stages over and over again, you should gradually build up enough resources to buy something that can help you through. If you're slamming through the game though, you might find it hard to save up enough to buy much of anything before reaching the end. I like the subtlety of this a lot more than just simply jacking up enemy HP values or a drop in your own. Along with the store came a few items that would also see reappearances. E-tanks were a thing since 2, but W and S tanks were added in World 4. Of course, W tanks seem pretty obvious, and S tanks are pretty much just the same thing as M tanks from 5, which had the added benefit of turning all on-screen enemies into extra lives if you used it while full. Though yet another thing I didn't realize was added in here was the energy balancer, which, if you grab an ammo refill that would normally go to waste, it'll toss it into another weapon that actually needs it. This is so dang convenient. I can't be the only one who's had a power that I know I'll need more of later, saw an enemy drop a refill, then have to pause to swap weapon, grab the power up, then swap back, sometimes even questioning on whether the smaller refill is even worth the trouble. Just being able to grab and go without the trip to the pause menu is so much nicer, essentially just a quality of life update, so it's no wonder it became a standard upgrade. You're even able to get it in 6, Proto Man just kinda hucking it at you in a random side room, kinda like it was added in at the last minute, and Dr. Light installed it directly into his greatest creation, X. Speaking of new upgrades, there's the Mega Arm. While Rock's lemons stay the same, his charge shot becomes a rocket punch. In 7, we get the Super Adapter, which, while adding in some homing, attacks the same way. Along with its jetpack, this is pretty much just a combination of the Rush adapters from 6 and the Mega Arm from World 5. And hey, if you can't find the fist upgrade for it normally, do you know where you can get it instead? The store! Kind of a shame that the Super Adapter only shows up once in mainline, especially given that Bass gets to keep his super form, but at least we get to see it again in X-Dive and the Archie Sonic crossover. Tango is an offensive support unit, like Beat, bouncing and spinning around to take out enemies. And he's another one that I really wish would appear more often. I read that he does show up again in the Rockman and Forte Japan only sequel, and for us, there is a support program you can summon in Battle Network, and he's in Proto Man Shop in 10. Those two do seem to get paired together, him hanging around Proto Man a good bit in the Gigamix manga, though he also appears to help Mega Man fight Sonic in the Archie comics. So while he might not play too big of a role in the games, he's hardly been forgotten. Now, this one's just speculation, but I think these games really influenced Inti Creates. Given the types of games that they make, especially the Mega Man ones, I'd say they have a reputation for being hard, borderline unfair. When I first played 9, I thought they were fetishizing difficulty, and Mega Man 2, while making the games as hard as they remember them being, rather than how they actually were. Then I finally got around to playing the World titles, me only having Dr. Wily's Revenge as a kid, and things started feeling a bit familiar. Stages covered in insta-kills, enemy placements where the only way to really counter them is to memorize their location, and generally just a lot of traps that feel more mean-spirited than a genuine challenge. 9 is lousy with this. I constantly question why I like it as much as I do, and while it's toned down significantly in 10, there's still some. On the Game Boy, each has some examples of this, though World 3 is by far the worst offender. And what is 3 times 3? 9. It all fits. But if you think I'm really reaching with the level design comparison, consider this. While stripping out a lot of the things that have become standard in the classic titles, most notably the slide and charge, the store stayed in. 10 is also the game that brought back the Mega Man Killer line, so while I could be wrong here, it definitely feels like Inti Creates played more Minakuchi than Capcom growing up. The Stardroids only appear in one game, but I'd still say they had a big impact on the fandom. World 5 is easily the most popular in the side series, and its originality, Boss is chief among that, is probably what plays the biggest part. While I wanted to play them all and was really disappointed when I realized that Mega Man Mania was no longer coming, 5 was the only one that felt like a must-play for this very reason. There's the big SNES-style fan remake in the works, the Stardroids are the main villains for a significant part of Gigamix, and even Ian Flynn in the Archie comics made sure to start dropping hints for their eventual appearance, that never happened, before he'd even gotten to Mega Man 3. So I'm definitely not the only one these guys made an impression on. I just hope that sometime down the line, be it a new game or just DLC attached to another one, the Stardroids come back and are officially brought into the fold. This next one ain't exactly great, but these also established the trend I mentioned at the top, of handheld Mega Man games just kind of recycling most of the mainline stuff, just on a smaller screen. They did this for 4 games, though World 2 at least brought its own music, and this continued on into the short-lived Extreme series, the first of which was almost a shrunk-down copy-paste of the Super Nintendo titles, and the second at least remixing the levels and having more original bosses, but still being largely derivative. I'll save the rest of the snarky comments for the eventual review. While to a degree, a lot of games did this back then, Donkey Kong at least gave us flying pigs, and Mario got so weird that Mario Land evolved into Wario Land. So I'd say Extreme borrowed more than most. And while I'll give World some points for creativity, I think I'd have a harder time doing a similar video for Extreme. Me probably mentioning how the Solar Erasure incident was referenced in X6, and I don't know, them retroactively giving Iris more than just one game. Kinda lame. And for a weaker one, to give us an even 10, there's the arcade shooter section near the end of World 5. It's kinda similar to just using the rush jet, since with the scrolling screen, you're constantly moving forward. Rather than jumping though, you have more control over your movement, and are able to fly freely through the air. You get similar sections in 8 and Street Fighter X Mega Man on jet this time rather than Rush's spaceship form, but you do move around as if you're playing Gradius, so I'm counting it. As a bonus, since a few of my bullet points were a little flimsy, something that I wish the mainline would have taken more inspiration from World on were all the weird Wily Machines. Dr. Wily's Revenge had an odd metal recreation of his head. World 2 and 3 had strange, borderline goofy ones. World 4 had a mech that felt like what Gamma should have been, and while World 5 had a really drawn out final sequence, it was still pretty unique. But no, most of the ones we get mainline are just big hunks of metal with a skull on it, followed by a capsule. I'll forgive World 4 since the previous forms were interesting. But those are my 10. Were there any that I missed? I feel like there's at least one obvious thing I'm forgetting, and I could have talked about Rockman Shadow to give Quint some love, but not only have I never played his game, I don't like to acknowledge his existence. Also, is there enough stuff here to justify the World Series? Most of what I pulled was from 4 and 5 respectively, so if you want to pick and choose, that's fine. That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially Mega Man. For everlasting peace,